All right, guys, so we are doing the last mastery test in Unit 1 of Biology. It is cell processes and transports. Good work so far. All right, don't want to show you the answer, as always. So, big thing, big thing to learn when it comes to cells and everything else is energy is obtained by breaking something called ATP, okay? ATP, whenever you hear that three-letter acronym, think energy. So it requires energy. So sodium and potassium ions are transported using, and it's something called active transport. So we transport things, it's called active transport when they choose to move those things. All right. So neurons and muscle cells perform different functions. In the body, these cells have the same genetic makeup. So neurons and muscles, every aspect, every single cell in our body is made of the same genetic makeup. The function of muscle cells is very obvious. It's movement. Every single tiny action you do, movement. All right. Okay, so you're trying to drag each label to the correct location. This is just a definition question. So isotonic, okay? That means an equal amount of stuff is coming in and going out. So the photo that shows that is the one with an arrow leading in and leading out. All right, hypotonic, I tend to think of the O as like getting bigger. It's like a big round circle. So that's hypotonic, is with the arrow going in. Stuff coming in, that's gonna make it bigger. And stuff going out, that's gonna be hyper, it's leaking. It's leaking out like the E in hypertonic. Good way to remember that. This one is a little bit hard. So the big thing here is each one of these letters, so mRNA and DNA. So DNA is made into mRNA, okay? And you're trying to show which mRNA and DNA match. And they will always be the opposite. Now, follow me. A's and T's are pairs in DNA, and so are A's and U's, and then C's and G's. So if you think C to G, those two match up, and then A to T or U match up, okay? So if you look, and it'll make a little bit more sense in just a second, you have A. You have 5 A's in the beginning, okay? So what did I just say? U's match up with A's. So you have U. Then you have TT, AA, G, C, C, G. Make sense? Again, you have GGC. So if we're talking the opposite, it should be CCG. There you go, this one. We've got TAAT, so you should have AUUA. And the same thing here, C goes to G, T goes to A goes to U. There you go. Okay. Going through the tutorial will really help you with that bit of information. It's a little bit harder here. Okay. So modes of transports to the molecule. Okay. Oxygen is moved. Something called simple diffusion, meaning it just comes straight into the cell. Okay. Water, you've probably heard of this term, osmosis. Water is just moving through a cell. If water moves from out of the cell to in the cell or anything else, that's called osmosis. An amino acid, so protein. Amino acids, we talked about it earlier in this unit. Amino acids are proteins, so proteins carry that. Calcium, okay, it has to be actively transported. So where it says it moves from low concentration to high concentration, if you have kind of like when we talked about the balance of hypotonic and stuff. If you have a lot of water here and no water here, okay, and you put them next to each other and you let one pour into each other, like this. Here's a water bottle, right? And when I tilt it, if you notice, the water balances between the two. It's the same thing here. If I have a high concentration here and a low concentration of water up here, and I balance it, it's gonna go and even out. The opposite happens with active transport. Some cells come and they go, hey, we need to move the low amount of water back down here. It works the opposite. And last is exocytosis. So a lot of explanation for that one. A little bit more complex. The backbone of DNA and RNA is, so we talked about it, DNA has a lot of carbohydrates in it, okay? So it is sugar and phosphate. We talked about it way earlier, first lesson. There's a P in DNA that stands for phosphorus. So that's how you know that. DNA is double-stranded due to the, and if you look, adenine, A, C, G, T, what we did just a couple of questions ago, that's what that stands for. And those are called bases. So you think amino acids are like proteins, the DNA is bases, okay? Balances out in your body. And then uracil, which is that U we had talked about, is also found, is a base found in DNA, or in RNA, Okay. A little bit more complex stuff we're getting into here. Match the function to the type of tissue. Okay, so nervous tissues send signals between the brain and body, nerves, your neurons. Your muscles, all right, they allow something like shivering. When you shiver, you're flexing your muscles and it produces heat. The epithelial, or the skin, that's what that means. It protects the skin from bacteria, and structural support is connective tissue. All right, which image looks the most like DNA? All right, and even though this kind of has that, the spiral staircase is the one you're looking for because it twists like a helix. Oop, I went back here. Didn't mean to do that. All right. So you want the steps of protein synthesis, okay? So first, when we make proteins, okay, what we're gonna do is we're gonna read. Transcribed means to read, kind of. It means to, a good way of thinking about it is read, all right? So DNA's read and copied a little bit, okay? We take that information and copy it, okay? That's what transcribed means. We take that copied information, which is called RNA, and we make it into little messages, which is what that M means, messaged information, okay? Then we have ribosomes, which is protein. Protein binds to the message to transport it. We talked about proteins transporting stuff, okay? Amino acids then line up in a sequence, okay? The proteins line up and a protein is produced. Kind of reads that information and makes a protein. Again, complex stuff, so if it, get the basics down of it and you'll be okay, all right? So again, we talked about this. So let's do the organelles first, okay? This big ball, that is the nucleus, all right? This right here, we talked about it before, okay? That is the, right here. Right here it's pointing. It's kind of a confusing diagram. There's little dots right here, and we talked about the little dots being proteins, like ribosomes. And then we talked about these tubes, which is the endoplasmic reticulum. And then we talked about this separate thing over here, that's the Golgi, okay? So as we go through, just exactly the thing we just did in the last question, okay, the nucleus, DNA transcribes it to mRNA. All right, RNA is then made into proteins. Those proteins then are moved and transported and then modified in some way and transported again, okay? All right, concentration of solutes is low inside a cell. So the cell is in a, okay, so another complex thing a little bit. So again, if I take a sponge, good idea is a sponge, and I put it in water, okay, the water inside the sponge is very low. I put it in water, the first thing it's gonna do, all that water is gonna rush in, okay? And what we talked about rushing in, that's hypertonic. Things are rushing, you know, if, so a particular cell in this cell uses energy for its transport. The type of transport is also known as, and we talked about it before, active transport, Basic building blocks of DNA and RNA. We've talked about this in almost every lesson. It's nucleotides, okay? Which sentence supports the statement that complex multicellular organisms are made up of specialized cells? So we have specialized cells, right? human liver cells make proteins and they do something different than the neurons, than the heart, than the lungs. Okay, that's how we know all of our cells have the same genetic information, but they have special roles. They do different things, they look different. That's what's important, that's what's unique. Signal conduction in the body. So signal conduction is, like we talked about, it's transmitting like electricity, you can see, which is nervous tissue. It's the neurons in our brain. They're sending electrical signals to our body to do different things. Okay, we talked about this before. You're trying to get DNA, and you're doing the opposite. So A's go to T, T go to A, G go to C, C go to G, right? So you should have T. So you should look for the one that says T, A, C, 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 G. T, A, C, 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 G. Okay, they all start like that. Okay, not this one. So you've got the first three, C, 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 G. You have T, A, so it should be A, T. Okay, so you're down to these two. T, T, A. Yeah, so it's this one. It matches up with the opposites of this one. Trying to confuse you, I guess. Hemoglobin is a protein that binds to oxygen. You see it in red blood cells. What statement does this information best describe? Proteins in specialized cells are the result of an expression of particular genes, right? So in blood cells, we see that specific protein was made to do a specific function, but that proteins do so many different things in our body, so it's specialized. It's based on the cell. The next question says, insulin's an important hormone. After an individual eats a meal, glucose travels through the bloodstream. The glucose causes the bacteria to release insulin. Insulin travels through the bloodstream, attaches to insulin receptors, and allows them to take in glucose. So, what does this best show? That cells interact with each other. Like, that's the biggest thing, is if you look, glucose is traveling through the bloodstream, it reaches the pancreas, it goes through, all these steps, but like these cells, they're reacting to everything, they're regulating everything, right, in our body. All right, what type of transport is used for glucose in blood and intestinal cells? So, transport in intestinal cells. Okay, so let's see. Passive transport. Okay, so what we're looking at, we're seeing passive and active transport. We're trying to figure out which one is which. Again, passive transport is if I have this and it balances out. I don't have to do anything, it automatically sorts. But active transport would be, now that it's balanced, I'm moving it against balance. I'm actively transporting something away from balance, okay? And so, let's read this. Glucose provides energy for the cells. Different cells have different mechanisms for glucose. Intestinal cells contain proteins that transport glucose against a concentration gradient. These proteins couple the movement of glucose. When bound by a glucose molecule, these proteins change shape and allow glucose. Okay, so you have one kind of just balancing out, all right, because you have a transport against. So intestinal cells go against the concentration gradients. So we should have the one that intestinal cells have to have active transport. Okay, but let's double check. Blah, blah, blah. Red blood cells have proteins embedded in their membrane. Move down its concentration gradient. So that's the key word here. It's moving down. So glucose, blood cells take in glucose. They just allow it to happen. It happens passively. Okay, two more. Okay, an amoeba is a single-celled organism. Okay, here we kind of talked about it. You have food, okay? So an amoeba, there's food around, and it kind of just it swallows a whole, but it's a cell. Okay, it surrounds the whole particle and puts it inside of its cell. Okay, and we call that endocytosis. Cytosis for like cell, and into the cell. Exocytosis would mean out of the cell. So that's into the cell. And are involved in the regulation of homeostasis. So homeostasis is balance. That word means balance. So it's this one, okay? And the reason why is, so over here we've got suppresses the immune system that doesn't really show balance, induces sleep, and production is slowed by exposure to light. That doesn't really show balance. Here we've got, it increases the production of red blood cells when oxygen levels are low. So it's trying to increase oxygen levels. So it's trying to balance things out. It'll increase something else to increase this and balance it out. So when something's low, it's gonna make it higher. But that's it. All right, guys, so good work on that one. That's it for Unit 1 when it comes to the mastery tests.